Well, hi everybody. I'm glad to be back. Um, Tammy, I'm sorry, I'm going to make one more requirement of your voice if I can. First, would it be possible for me to share my screen? I'll be presenting at the Human Intimacy Conference, March, I think it's 14th and 15th. I don't have to think I have it right here in front of me. Yes, March 14th and 15th. This is online. Kevin Skinner is the one organizing it. Many of you will know him. If you don't, he's someone whose work is worth getting known. I and many other experts, both in relationships, individual recovery, and there's even a track for post-divorce in recovery. So there's still lots of time to register. You can snap this QR code here, or you can go to humanintimacy.com to sign up. It should be very good and a great resource. I think if you sign up this month, Kevin is throwing in his 100-day, he doesn't call this, but it's a how to stop using porn course for free. So there are some additional perks to signing up. Love to see you all there.
And this is the first offering of this is the first conference of this, so probably will be continuing, but this is the inaugural, so join if you are able to.
Yep. And then Tammy, I wanted to ask you, number one, because I'm a little ignorant, and number two, everybody on the call could benefit from this. How do we find out about these special workshops, groups, things that Seeking Integrity is doing? Is there an email list, social media?
Yes, and so yes, we have special events. In fact, next week I've been sharing, so tomorrow is the Betrayed Partner, art, healing through art. But next week we've got Candace Christiansen joining to talk about neurodivergence and sex addiction. We've got Leilani Sinclair to talk about how kids who have parents who are sex addicts. She's going to do a two-parter February and March. Maddie Corman, who was the one-woman show off Broadway for Accidentally Brave. She is joining. We're having a conversation with her. It's a really special event because it's at not our typical webinar times. That will be March 3rd. Super excited to have her. Because she talks in. It's on HBO Max too, and I've got the links. I'll share the links in the chat. All of this stuff is always on the Seeking Integrity website, but I will pull, for those of you here, I will pull it specifically and put it in the chat. But Maddie's journey is documented in a book, Accidentally Brave, and also in the HBO Max show. And then she's going to talk about the rest of the story, because that was like 10 years ago. So, kind of the rest of her story. So super excited to have that. I mean, it's a very unique opportunity. So, and I'm working on having more of those kind of opportunities, those kind of one-offs on special topics. Stay tuned. But yes, to John's question, if you are on the email list, you can sign up as a contact through Seeking Integrity. You will get the list we do highlight the upcoming things. There's always the website where you can go and you can add them to your calendar. And yes, it's on social media, all the usual and customary social media outlets as well. So, and then me, when I'm on these, going like, hey, you should go check these out. So
I'm in awe. It's been I think this is my 13th year as a CSAT. And in some ways that doesn't feel like ancient history, and in some ways it is. I'm just in awe of what organizations like Seeking Integrity, and there's a lot of other ones too, they're pulling together and bringing to the forefront good resources for free, being able to hear stories and experiences of other people in sexual addiction recovery, and betrayal trauma recovery. Nothing like that existed 13 years ago.
Absolutely. And we want to have real resources, not all the anecdotal stuff or whatever, but also there's, all of these are hopeful. There are people that have gone through this and gotten, on the other side of it, and, continuing to do their work and healing, and, and growing personally, and
Yeah.
as couples for those that choose to. But like you mentioned with the conference, we did a 4-part series on, should I stay or should I go? We want to make sure people are choosing and not feeling
Mhm.
not feeling like they don't have an option. We also have the
Yeah.
Moving On Alone drop-in group for betrayed partners, for those that have been left, have left, or are thinking of leaving. That's a different space, because that's where we're not going like, how do we heal the relationship? This is, what do you need to do to take care of you,
Yeah.
outside of, when this is happening. So we continue to add. I'm just shocked at how many, I mean, you've been doing this for a long time, but I was talking to Angela Spearman. She's been doing it 6 years, and we've added so many more. We
Yeah.
keep adding, other resources for people too. So we'll
Yeah.
keep working on it.
It's amazing. Thank you to you and the team at Seeking Your Integrity for doing this. It's an invaluable resource. So today, um, we're gonna talk about the big theory, the big developmental theory. We'll talk about attachment theory today, but I have to disappoint you out of the gate. Attachment theory is endlessly complex, and there are so many fascinating rabbit holes, and we will go down exactly none of them today. So, this is a very high level view. I'm going to give a primer on attachment theory, um, so I can make the connection with what this teaches us about maturity in a relationship. Um, I may circle back to some of these rabbit holes in attachment theory, just kind of where my reading and my research and my interest takes me. Because I think in my book, attachment theory is where most of it is at to explain human behavior and relationships. It's the basis of how I work as a PACT therapist. Um, Attachment and attachment theory is on full display in sex addiction and betrayal trauma recovery. Um, so we could talk around the clock about this for 3 months and just be scratching the surface. So if you are want to take notes, write down names and things that I cite to Google later. There's a lot of information out there. Um, I pulled from an article from positivepsychology.com just because it was a good summary of things. So the quotes that I'll be reading, that's where they come from. So attachment theory really got its grounding, it got its start from John Bowlby in 1969, and I believe that he mostly um, at one point in his career he worked with children during and after the Blitz on London during World War II. So he made observations about how family systems worked and how children responded to disruptions in family systems. So that was the little seed, the little kernel. And basically, what attachment theory is it's based on the premise that the quality of our early relationships with caregivers has a significant impact on our development as human beings. So that statement right there, um, on its face, is almost like no duh. And then for me, when I read that, there's this sense of awe, there's this sense of magnitude, like holy cow, it is all based on our relationship with our caregivers. So I've said this before and I'll highlight it again. The template that is created in our relationship with our parents and caregivers early on is the one that we recycle in adult romantic and and attachment relationships. So it really does. It's one of the most annoying parts of therapy, I think, for most people. Like it really does come back to mom and dad, like all of it, and not in a blame way, but more in a way of understanding. I think when we really truly understand and can look with a compassionate eye about the families and the nervous systems that we sprung from, there are many of our struggles that I don't believe get excused, but they get contextualized. Um, and the puzzle pieces become a bit clearer. In attachment theory, this is all about how the parent responds to the child's reach. So it is natural and instinctive, with a few exceptions that we'll talk about in a minute, for every child to reach to, solicit, try to engage the parent in caretaking and an emotional resonance. Um, so it's how the parent responds, not how the child asks, that is the key to how attachment is formed. So in 1959, Harry Harlow, those of you who have taken high school psychology will remember Harry Harlow and the wire mother and the cloth mother. He took rhesus macaque monkeys and infants, and he had one apparatus that approximated the look of a mother rhesus macaque. One was a structure covered in wire mesh, and it had a bottle. There was another structure that had more of a constructed face that looked more like a rhesus monkey, and it had a terry cloth towel wrapped around it. So he wanted to study how the infants responded to nurture versus comfort. And what he found is the majority of the infants spent most of their time with the terry cloth mother, um, even when they were starving for nutrients. So, all of you think for a minute, have you ever found yourself in a relationship that is nutritionally devoid but provides comfort because it's familiar or because it's not facing a loss? Harlow started pointing to this may be inborn in us. This is not a learned thing, it is not a preference. One of the things that came out of his study was that emotional well being is as important as physical well-being. So it's two sides of the same coin. It's parts of the same circle, parts of the same whole. Comfort is not a luxury. Comfort and well-being and attachment, emotional well-being, may be as necessary as nutrition and the basics for healthy development. Um, so it always makes me smile, but not in a fond way, when I'll hear people of a certain generation say, like I would hear my grandmother say this: "We had a good marriage. He never hit me, and he made sure I had money." And I'm sure there was more to their relationship than that, but um, my grandparents were children of the Depression, and you can see when times are tough, when eking out a survival is hard, the bar gets set pretty low for what we feel like we need. Um, and so part of attachment theory is understanding and accepting that emotions and comfort are not a luxury, they are a necessity. Um, Bowlby in 1979 really started expanding on his attachment ideas, and this is where he presented. He presented initially 3 attachment styles, which were later expanded upon. But he proposed that children's attachment behavior, crying, clinging, following, is a way to keep caregivers close. I've mentioned this several times here before. We can see in infants as young as 11 months old that they intentionally elicit the best care that their parents are able to give. This is mostly true that all children will display attachment seeking behavior. There are some differences, like if you have a neurodivergent child who may not demonstrate social engagement real clearly. Some parents they mistake this as this kid just doesn't need it as much. The baseline fact with all human existence is we all need it, whether we're good at signaling for it or not. We all need it, whether it's readily available or not. So again, attachment theory points to the burden is on the parent's shoulder to decipher or decode, or just to remember, this kid needs closeness, affection, touch, warmth, engagement, even if they're not strong signalers for it. And so it becomes the parent's task to negotiate the comfortable repartee, the comfortable exchange of emotional information. Um, I'll make a note here. Spouses are not replacement parents. So I'll tell you right now where attachment theory and how it applies to maturity in a relationship is not making one another responsible for your attachment deficits or wounds. Your marriage is not where you're going to be made whole. And I say that meaning you aren't entitled to it. It can be a place where two people really construct something that is better than family and they really pay attention and are sensitive to. But unlike when we're children who just get to be demanding, like that's what kids get to do. They don't have to think twice about the inconvenience or the emotional state of the parent. They get to just need and want what they need and want. Adults not so. So attachment in adult relationships is carefully and deliberately constructed. So one of the things that Bowlby started to point to and Ainsworth further highlighted is that there are distinct patterns in attachment. Now, depending on the sources you read, in my experience, websites and therapists or therapy-like places that are trying to sell something will tell you that attachment can change. I have not seen strong evidence of that in the academic research, that baseline attachment styles change. And I actually think that for repairing relationships, trying to get an attachment style to change is making it way more difficult than it has to be. Ainsworth in 1969, she's famous for her experiment, The Strange Situation. She brought parents and their young children, toddler age, into a waiting room. And the experiment was the parent would leave the room and leave the child in the presence of other, caring adults, adults who are keeping the kid safe, but who the kid did not know. And then she videotaped not just what it was like for the kid when the parent left, but when the parent returned. And you could see some distinct patterns. And she broke it out into securely attached children, fearful or disorganized children, anxious children, and avoidant children. So those of you who have done cursory study on attachment theory, you've probably seen the 4 quadrants: secure, anxious, avoidant, dismissive, disorganized, fearful. So what we would see in securely attached children is they would be upset when the parent would leave, and they would be quickly comforted when the parent came back. And in between, they would display exploratory, curious behaviors. So I'm upset, parent is gone, can adapt to the new situation. I will move about in my environment to a reasonable degree. And when parent comes back, you'd usually see a melting and a curling behavior in the secure kids. Like they would actually engage with the caregiver. For fearful children, they may not register that the parent's gone. They may freak out when the parent is gone. It's just that it's disorganized. Usually with disorganized children, there was some kind of avoidance of the caregiver when they came back, or the time for the child to approach the caregiver and reunite would be significantly longer. Anxious children were anxious when the parent left, anxious as the parent was gone, anxious when the parent came back. Avoidant children would display distress when the parent left, but when the parent came back, there was a stiffening and a pulling away from the parent. That's where we started to get the idea, really cement the idea of attachment styles and really look at how that projects from early on. Bowlby, which we won't get into, he really looked at mother-infant pair bonding early on, and he saw developmental stages based on the child of what attachment needs were. If you're interested in that, you should Google it. The basis of that is children's needs and signaling for attachment change as they develop. So in family relationships, kids are always a moving target. It's supposed to be that way. There's not something wrong with your kid if they're difficult or you can't decode or decipher. That's my big takeaway from from Bowlby's study of infants. It's always a moving target. Again, it's up to the parent to find the kid. It's up to the parent to put in the work. Um, so there's been later and continued research in attachment. That's one of the things that's really exciting about this now. I think it's one of the um, most studied aspects of human development right now. It's in the forefront of the public consciousness, which I think is good. Darvishand in 2018 looked at factors influencing attachment. Caregiver factors such as age, education level, financial security, psychological security, and health during pregnancy and labor, postpartum care, skin to skin contact. There's also factors in the infant that influence attachment, like premature birth. Sex makes a big difference. There is a plethora of research about how in Western cultures, and this is also seen largely around the world, but we treat baby girls differently than we treat baby boys. And take whatever stereotypes you might have about men and women in adulthood, and we can see how those stereotypes in infancy provide different care, attachment, and attunement for baby girls and baby boys. So there are family-specific patterns of attachment and attunement. There are also larger cultural patterns of attachment and attunement. You can have genetic factors in a kid, variations in their oxytocin levels. Oxytocin is the bonding hormone. You can have variations in a parent's oxytocin levels. So you can also have environmental factors like high stress environments, financial instability, parental conflict affects insecure attachment, and then cultural factors. So, for example, you can have collectivist cultures like Japan, many Asian cultures, some Latin cultures as well, and then more individualistic cultures like the United States. It all affects. And the research is really fascinating because it can drill down to specific factors. It's really interesting. So for me, the worst part of this rabbit hole, and I think this has been one of the biggest contributors to my anxiety as a parent and an adult. The more I learn about human attachment, you just have this ever increasing tally of things that you're supposed to do or not to do to screw up your kid. And it's not wrong to look at that and say, "Gosh, there's so much that can affect this. There are so many risk factors out there." So what does this what does attachment theory in general teach us about maturity in relationships? First, what it teaches me is that the die is cast very early on, and it doesn't change much. Your home base does not change much throughout your life, even if you work really, really hard on it. I don't know that an avoidant person as an attachment base will ever become a secure base person. Hope is not lost, and here's why. The second thing I'll illustrate. The second thing that this teaches about maturity is I'll illustrate with my experience on Sunday. So I was having a time with my toddlers, and I found myself Googling, "Why do I hate parenting toddlers?" And it's how I was feeling. And the results didn't offer any keen insights in how to change this struggle into something that feels wonderful, at least not on the first page of Google. It was full of discussion boards and articles about how everyone struggles parenting toddlers. And that experience was really validating, and it also put a shift in me. As is often the case in our relationships, I think we depend on the right feeling to be able to do the right thing. I was Googling that because I was hoping for some piece of wisdom, how I could move from this fed up, tired stance into like every day is a gift and every moment we have is wonderful. And the shift doesn't come from a way that we feel. What I left my Google search was another realization for the 600th time. It does not matter how I feel. I have to parent these kids in a certain way if I'm not going to hurt them long term. And so don't get me wrong, feelings are really, really important. Our attachment history is really, really important, but it is not, it does not totally dictate how we can and must show up in our relationships. So to me, that's what attachment theory points to about maturity in relationships. We realize we may or may not have been dealt a full deck of cards. We may or may not have gotten the experiences we need to feel secure inside. When it comes to our relationships with our children, when it comes to our relationships with our partners, we also have these wonderful frontal lobes that can grasp bigger ideas, that can wrap our minds around non-concrete threat. It doesn't have to be right in front of me. It doesn't have to be happening for me to understand that bad things can happen. It's why I put my seatbelt on every time I get in my car, because I don't know when I'm going to need it. And I'm not going to rely on my reflexes to hurry and put it on because a crash is coming. Again, we can take steps that do not have to be motivated by what's right in front of our face or what's going on in our hearts. And our ability to do that, I think, comes from reflection, it comes from study, it comes from learning, it comes from recognition. So, how does this apply to couples in recovery? First, what I want to say to everybody here, and I'm sorry to say this, I'm not trying to be John the Prophet of Doom, but nobody's attachment style will be changed or healed. That's not what it's about. Um, it's not a thing, at least not one to pin your hopes on. I think you'd be better off playing the lottery if you were counting on an attachment style change to make your relationship work better. When both parties really realize what's at stake for each other, dependent children, pets, and their relationship, there's only one conclusion: we can't afford to be at war. In other words, we can't afford to just do or rely on solely what we feel, because what we feel is a short-term evolutionary advantage. What we feel gives us access to quick information, heuristics, assumptions that can be really great for stepping out of the road at the last minute because we just sense that something is coming. But as far as projection into the long term, that takes outer cortical integration, that takes a strong executive in the brain, that takes work on being able to regulate your amygdala and other lower cortical structures that have us acting like an exposed nerve, which is a real part of the human condition, but ultimately, I think, not an excuse for bad behavior. Ultimately, not an excuse for not doing everything that we can to hold up our side of the weight for making a relationship work. A lot of adulthood, like I came face to face again with on Sunday, a lot of adulthood is just doing the right thing because it's the right thing. It's not because it's pleasant. It's not because it's easy. It's not because you have energy for it. It's because you must. The stakes are too high. So we can't keep the scales tipped in an unfair balance either. That's where revolution comes from. That's where getting rode out of town on a rail comes from, is when we've been too unfair for too long. So we have to work together. And the one who broke it, the one who sinned the greater sin, very specifically to sex addiction recovery, the one who kept the secret, who broke the bonds of the marriage, who did not disclose information to their spouse that could have changed everything so their spouse could make a choice, carries the responsibility for the shift in mood in the relationship. So for maturity to take place, we have to learn how to control our impulses. We have to learn how to regulate our emotions. We have to grind it out so we can start thinking about our long term, not just what feels good or gets me out of trouble now. For a lot of addicts in recovery, and I'll put spouses in there too, that's the early work. In my work with couples, I've had my heart broken time after time, seeing relationships that cling to the comfort while starving from nutrients, that make compromises within themselves just to keep a relationship so we don't have to face loss. And don't get me wrong, loss of a relationship is not a small thing. But like Harry Harlow showed in his experience, some of those infants risked starvation because it was hard to leave what was comfortable. I get that for babies. I think for babies, they should not be trekking over long distances and going long periods of time without food and without nutrients, without comfort. Adults can do some of that, again, to get what's better in the long term. So for discovering partners, you might have to be able to contemplate in a real way more loss than you feel ready for. At some point, for all discovering partners, whether you stay together or not, you are going to have to contemplate more forgiveness than you feel ready for. Because again, maturity is not just a matter of what I think I can do or what's comfortable. It's a matter of what must be done so that this relationship, so that this life is functional. That's the parent's duty towards the kid. I have to keep it functional regardless of how I feel. I will say one thing that came out of my musings about my toddlers on Sunday is I used to dread, and I still dread bedtime because they take forever to fall asleep. I texted my wife last night and said, my 2-year-old, my little boy, this kid can keep himself awake like none other. 15 minutes after finishing reading, he's laying next to me and he's doing the twitch thing. And then and like 15 seconds later, he's up and like pointing at little points of light on the wall from his blinds. And it's just like, dude, you were there. Like, stop. But one thing that came out of that, it wasn't from a shift in feeling, it was recognizing I have to do the right things with these kids. Bedtime, instead of being let's lay quietly or sing, I now have a ritual with my 2-year-old. We gather every book in the house that he wants to read, and we read a whole pile. The other night, I read to him for 45 minutes, which was a lot better for me, and I think a lot better for him than having one of those tense standoffs. Okay, it's dark, turn off the lights, close your eyes, go to sleep. I think when we start with, I got to do the right thing, we can find paths that are more relieving to walk, but they aren't going to appear just because we want them. You have to take a step into the dark. Um, for betrayed partners as well, you might have to take your own needs for safety deadly serious. Nobody gets to mess with this for any reason. It's not worth it to compromise my feeling of safety. And I don't mean to sound callous here, but I see a lot of betrayed partners through no fault of their own suspending, moving towards and enacting what would create them safety because they don't want to dislodge or displace or rub up against, injure their partner's own attachment wounds. And again, it's a really hard calculation. It's not easy. But when somebody in the relationship starts leading with, hey, we got to have this visceral safety thing going, no ifs, ands, or buts. I'm headed there. I would like you to come with me and help with that, but I can't wait. That's the stance I've seen in betrayed partners that clarifies and helps the relationship move along to healing if it is. Both have really hard work to do in healing early on, and it's not about going back and being the parent we never had. It's about both of us getting really focused on what has to happen, regardless of how we feel. So your relationship, even early in recovery, when you wrap your head around this, we need visceral safety. I broke it, I bought it. I have to prioritize my own safety. I have to be serious about that. No ifs, ands, or buts. When we both wrap our heads around that, even in early recovery, your relationship can become that secure base that you need in order to be curious about the world, to expand yourself and explore. It doesn't take years and years of recovery. It doesn't have to, I don't think, before you can start to feel this relationship is a place that can be stable and secure enough for us to go out and explore the world. But it depends on both parties wrapping their minds around that idea. We can't wait for the right feeling. We have to get the right structure in place. So that's what attachment theory pointed me to about maturity this week.
Thank you for this. All of you joining us live, please type your questions about this or other topics about betrayal, trauma, addiction, healing, etc. I was thinking when you're talking about, I wrote it down. Where did I write it? Shoot, it was like, oh, I know. What, because you were like on Sunday, you had to do what you needed to do no matter what. But for an addict in active addiction, a betrayed partner in the throes of, trauma, it doesn't always happen. So how do you navigate that and not get, oh my gosh, I've screwed up my children forever and all of that?
Yeah, it doesn't happen as parents or partners often. And I think one of the things that the human brain is really, really good at is rather than facing loss, we change the parameters so there doesn't have to be a loss.
Mm.
And I actually think loss can be really clarifying. Some of my biggest progress moments as a parent have come from giant disruptions to attachment that were my fault. And instead of justifying or ignoring, actually being able to come into that feeling and say, that didn't feel good. I know that's not where I should be. And and instead of flogging ourselves with that, we just keep the North Star there. I'm not giving up on that. I'll never stop trying to get that right. And again, when you understand your own attachment history, you can have a lot of compassion. I'm not starting in an expert place with that. Nobody ever showed me how to do that. I don't have an internal sense of how that works, but I do have an idea that there's something better than what comes naturally for me. So it's like learning how to ride a bike. Took the training wheels off and I fell this time. Well, I'm going to get back on and I'm going to try to line up and I'm going to try to go a little further this next time. I'm going to stay on it. Healing these developmental wounds to the point where we can function with choice. Um, in my book, it relies on the first law of learning, which is repetition. You keep at it, even though what you have to master is hard and may stay out of reach for a long time. Don't get discouraged. Don't give up on it. We are capable of that kind of growth. We are capable of that kind of being able to handle that kind of complexity. It's just not going to automatically come from, my heart's changed and now everything works.
Mm. When you're talking about the study with the little kids in the room and that sounds like little kids. So if those attachment styles, is this something like we're actually born with, or is this something that happens so early in development?
So I'll have to check the research again, but my most recent understanding is just like with personalities, we aren't born with personalities. We are born with temperament. So you have some kids that are more calm, you have some kids that are more reactive, are the two main kinds of temperament we talk about. And I think attachment and personality grow out of those. I think is what the current thinking is. So the attachment style is learned, it's formed between the relationship between parent and infant. But we're not completely blank slates at birth. Like I said, there can be factors like genetics, oxytocin levels, sex, uh, uh, what was the other one? Premature birth. Like there are genetic factors that kind of set the stage, but attachment is always built. It is not inherent.
And you mentioned like we treat baby girls different than we treat baby boys. Is that if it's in a different culture where they don't? And I don't know. I mean, I have no idea, but or if there's parents who are intentional about we're treating them the exact same. I'm kind of curious. How does that all play out? I'm sure somebody's done studies on that.
Yeah. So it's interesting. It's not about equality, it's about need. There was one study, if I had my research organized, I could cite it now, but there was one study I read a few years ago that like for example, baby girls are born more developed out of the womb. They can recognize faces within, I think it's within an hour or two. Baby
Oh,
boys,
wow.
it can take up to a day or two. So those are neurological differences that are largely fall on the lines of sex. Um, it's not about treating equal. It's about treating what the kid needs. So overall, baby boys at birth are actually born neurologically more vulnerable. Baby girls have stronger neck muscles too. They can hold their heads up sooner. We can also see this like through early ages and stages. Girls develop faster socially. They usually grow up physically faster than boys. Boys catch up in puberty. Um, there's all sorts of factors there that when you look at gender stereotypes in the United States, we actually treat boys like they are tougher and less vulnerable, which is generally not true. But it's not about an either or equality. Attunement and attachment comes from who is this kid in front of me? Let me try to brush aside all preconceived notions and just be really present with this kid. That's part of the task of attachment building.
And one more thing, and we've got a question, but so when you're talking about like attachment styles won't change, so so my question is like if I thought I was securely attached and now my relationship has been completely fractured, I may feel insecurely attached or whatever, or avoidant or whatever. But I presume when we're talking about these attachment styles, we're looking across more relationships and not just identifying one, or is that not the case?
Now, this is really interesting, and this is one of the things that like so I primarily do couples therapy, but I still have some individual clients who I consult with their couples therapist. So generally, attachment style is pervasive. However, I've observed like everyone is different in their marriage than how they are in general. So it's not to say that attachment style changes, but presentation changes depending on the relationship and depending on the status of the relationship. So the leg up that I see for people who are pervasively, maybe more securely attached, when there is a wound and there is a rupture, it may not take them as long or be as fraught or confusing to find stability again or to work back to a secure base. Again, not when I say secure base, I'm not saying attachment style. I'm saying being able to create security from where you're started. Anxious and avoidant people can create security in their relationships too. Even disorganized people can create security in their relationships. It's more a matter of in those situations, it's like the cookies are higher on the shelf. They're harder to get to. You have to work for it a bit more. So it's really that's again one of the rabbit holes of attachment theory you could get into is how and why presentations of attachment are different in primary attachment relationships versus family of origin versus friends versus work versus like more kind of perisocial people who I don't know. There can be a wide in the same person. There can be a wide array of presentation. That doesn't mean disorganized. Um, it means
And
different
when
relationships for different parts.
we're talking about access, and lots of people fall in the in-betweens.
Yep.
So it isn't just on the linear, access, so you can be more securely attached, but have a little bit of, so go
Yeah.
ahead.
I was going to say when I admit there's an attachment questionnaire, the ECR, experiencing close relationships. Um, People's self-report plotting changes when I have them think about different relationships. So again, attachment I think explains everything, but it is not the answer to everything. So as you're getting to know attachment style, I think it's important to hold that somewhat loosely because there's always a bunch of asterisks. And again, this isn't about manualizing. This draws attention towards how we feel and what is going on in the moment dictates a lot of what we will and won't do.
Well, and I think it's important to remember this is true, like this is our attachment style, but that isn't an excuse for not, like you
Yeah,
said, the cookies are higher, doesn't mean you
yeah,
go to, you don't work towards them. So, and then there's the reward of the cookies. So it's good. So,
yeah.
Okay, betrayed here 4 years since discovery, post formal therapeutic disclosure, solid foundation in individual recovery and trauma work on both sides, addict managing ADHD and RSD, and we are choosing to rebuild and aligning on a shared reality. Relationally, we run into hiccups, and my addict will get ADHD impulsive and triggered, saying some rude, experiencing any feedback from me as an attack. As a partner, what are loving and relational ways I can preserve our progress and disengage early in the negative cycle? Great question. Thank you for sharing that.
Yeah. Yeah, I love this. This is a good description of, like, for example, one of those neurodiverse things. This is a good example of how ADHD people will experience recovery and what will persist after good sobriety is established. So I've said this before, sobriety does not solve relationship problems. Sobriety does not make somebody nice or emotionally intelligent. It has to be worked on. So with a lot of the ADHD folks I work with in coupleships, we do a lot of educating and scaffolding around rejection sensitivity dysphoria, which is more and more coming into the eye as a feature of ADHD. Again, it's not an excuse, it's an understanding of my nervous system has a hard time handling certain kinds of input. So this is a situation that I think one of the good ways to help this is you make agreement early on, and you make agreement before the crap hits the fan, so to speak, so that we both know what to do when this is in play. So that is setting expectations for we apologize and take responsibility quickly. In situations like this, you may utilize an individual cool down. For an ADHD partner, it can help to move the body to get some of that like the fusing of the static, the stimulus static, and the integrating going on. So there's strategies that you would agree on ahead of time. You set up, you give each other permission to enforce, and you keep your eye on the prize. Our goal is to get two settled nervous systems here. Very rarely is it a straight shot for couples. A lot of times we have to do something like this. And if our aim, if our commitment is we want those two settled nervous systems, we both are willing to do whatever it takes to get there. Again, the gold standard for a relationship that works is not one that mitigates all harm. It's impossible. It's always a moving target. But it is one that doesn't tolerate separateness or harm for unnecessary lengths of time. I hope that helps.
It does. And please join the webinar next Wednesday with Candace. She's going to talk about these issues, and I'm confident she'll have some useful information for you all. Okay, next question. I was very sick as a child due to complications at birth. I was the third child. I experienced multiple types of severe sexual trauma from ages 5 to 12. And then at 12, my mother confesses that she tried to abort me. Oh my gosh. Obviously, that didn't work. I really don't even know what to think about how tightly I tried to stay attached to her until her death. I know my attention style is caused, it's probably attachment style, has caused lots of problems in my marriage. I would really like to change it, but you said that it's really unlikely because I know my attachment style was created by lots of awful things as a child. What can I do because I want to feel better as a person and create a better marriage?
So I'll offer some personal experience here, and that breaks my heart to hear. And I know there's lots of other people listening who have the same magnitude of stuff in childhood. You can see when it comes to attachment, a lot of people didn't have a prayer. They didn't have the type of parent who could be responsive. So for me, early on in therapy as an adult, it was a revelation to learn that I was preoccupied in my attachment. It was also a revelation to learn that I likely was not going to move my start line, is how I thought about it. I wasn't going to move my start line to secure. I was always going to start behind in preoccupied. And that started to give me grace to be able to say things in my important relationships like, I am feeling really, really anxious now, and I know that that's not going to last forever, or I know it's not your fault. Or I'm doing my hyper control thing right now because I'm scared.
Mhm.
So I look at it as like the strategies. If I'm starting in a more disadvantaged start position, there's strategies to get myself in a more solid place. But the acceptance comes from I'm always going to start with a bit of a struggle when it comes to doing the helpful thing in relationships, or the non-self-harming thing in relationships. So it helps a lot to um, learn some simple impulse control. Not because you're doing something bad, but the more you can learn and help your nervous system put some time between stimulus and response, the more you can learn to take risks and speak out loud. I know generally this is the kind of stuff that makes me feel like my heart is being ripped out, and I don't feel like I can stand it. I always go back to Mr. Rogers' advice: if it's mentionable, it's manageable. Um, so uh, I think the better person part of the question here is you are already a fine person. There is nothing wrong with you. You're like every other adult on the planet who has to navigate and has to reconfigure to be able to get off to a secure start. Everybody has to struggle that way in a relationship. So keep at it. Like I said earlier, part of the attachment, and this is part of the maturity and attachment too. As we move into adulthood, we realize we're not just passive receivers like we were when we were children. So this is where boundaries. This is where again, learning to speak for yourself. Hey, I need some time, or could you try that again? Or there's all sorts of things you can do. You can learn that accommodates the attachment style without making it a dead end.
So I put Dr. Eddie Caparucci and his wife wrote a book going deeper for betrayed partners, and it's The Inner Child. And I suspect you will find some resources within that that could be helpful. I hope you're working with a qualified therapist because that's a lot of, childhood trauma to address. And you're here, so assuming that you struggle, with betrayal trauma, et cetera, as well. So if you don't have a qualified therapist, please email me, tami@seekingintegrity.com, and tell me where you're located, and I'll help you find, to the best of my ability, someone to support you. Okay, the next one. I am an SA mother and mesh men husband, or my SA mother and mesh husband keeps throwing around divorce the last 5 years. Initially, the reason was given because we aren't happy. Then come to find out he'd been acting out consistently for 3 of those years with porn and masturbation. His recent request comes from claiming he's been clean for 5 months, but he isn't actually working a true recovery plan with a sponsor and 12-step, etc., as his CSAT recommended. It felt like he was using divorce as a way to avoid the hard work of recovery or take it off the table for me as a betrayed partner to create boundaries with him, using the scariest outcome and manipulating things to put all the cards in his hands. Or could it be because he has attachment and bonded to the porn and ritualism of masturbation that he goes down the path of leaving the relationship being the only option for his life? How long should an SA be in treatment before making a long-term relationship decision?
That's a good question. And in my book, I think it boils down less to an amount of time, and I would actually point here. Um, how long can you tolerate your an enmeshed person being unstable before you have Groundhog's Day
Mm-hmm.
and you're living in a perpetual loop? So there are some points of stabilization and some things that we hope people in addiction go through and realize and get less impulsive about. But there's no guarantees there. So, as in all things in a relationship, both sides of the equation must be worked. And so I've seen betrayed partners um, for lots of understandable reasons. There's no judgment on those reasons. I've seen betrayed partners lay out parameters. I would like you to XYZ, which I think is critical to getting this kind of clarity. Um, it's not a matter of waiting a time period though, or having your spouse jump through hoops. It's you looking at, once I've set the parameters, how is this feeling and how is this working? What is happening with my partner? I have seen people go through the technical aspects of a recovery program, be technically sober. They can check every box. And I would say they're not fit for relational consumption, nor are they interested in being in a relationship. So this is this is what I talk about, like comfort versus nutrients. People that we've been with for a long time um, can become comfortable to us, even if it's not comforting. So I would say here, keep a focus on the nutrients that you need, either within the relationship or without, and don't compromise. Don't compromise on your ability to get those nutrients. Ultimately, your partner, whether sober or not, may not be able or interested in feeding you in the way that you need to be fed. And that's where I said for betrayed partners, part of what attachment theory teaches us is you might have to consider a loss that you never wanted to go through or that you don't think you could handle. And I'm not saying go down the path of divorce. I'm saying make it an option for yourself. I don't think we have real choice unless we could see ourselves actually choosing either, unless we feel like that could work.
So real quick, I put the betrayed partners boundaries. The next couple of questions. The boundaries work group starts early April. Super helpful for both of and well, others too. But it's internal boundaries and external boundaries. Debbie McCrae is great at it. And then I also put the blog about should I stay or should I go? And it's just useful information. Like, do I even like this person? I think it's important questions to ask. So check that out. And we're out of time. We're going to get cut off. Thank you so much, Jon, as always.
Can we save these questions we haven't answered?
I can try if I don't get cut off real quick.
I might have snagged them. Let me just see
Oh,
here.
good.
I got them.
Okay, thank
So the
you. All
questions
right.
that didn't get answered, we will next time. Thanks.
Okay, thanks. Bye.
Bye.